At 11:17 at night, Nia Caldwell opened the bedroom closet and found the wedding album missing. Not hidden, not misplaced. Gone. Her husband, Graham Whitmore, had deleted every photograph of them together, from his phone, from their shared cloud account, even from the digital frame that had glowed quietly on the living room shelf for 3 years. When she asked him why, he said only that some memories should stay buried. She thought he was leaving her. Then, at 11:42, an unknown number sent her a single photograph. It showed her standing beside Graham in a hotel ballroom, 7 years before the two of them had ever met. The timestamp was real, and in the background, a woman was pointing directly at her. Nia stood in the closet doorway for a long moment before she understood what she was looking at. The shelf where the album always sat was bare, a rectangle of undisturbed dust marking the space where 7 years of memory used to live. She told herself there was an explanation, that Graham had moved it somewhere for safekeeping, that this was nothing. She checked his phone first, scrolling through folders that should have held hundreds of images of the two of them, their wedding, their honeymoon in the mountains, the small apartment they had shared before the house. Every folder was empty. She checked the cloud account next, the one they had set up together on their first anniversary, and found the same emptiness staring back at her. The digital frame in the living room, the one Graham had bought as a surprise gift, cycled through nothing but a black screen. Nia crouched in front of it and pressed the power button twice, certain it had simply malfunctioned, but the frame blinked awake to confirm what she already feared. It had been wiped clean. She walked slowly through the house, checking drawers, checking the box under the bed where they kept printed photographs from, before either of them owned a decent phone camera. That box, too, had been emptied. What frightened her most was not that Graham had deleted the photographs. It was the precision of it, the method, the fact that not a single image containing her face had survived anywhere in the house. She found him in his study, sitting very still at his desk, the laptop closed in front of him like something he was guarding. Nia stood in the doorway and asked him directly whether he was erasing her from his life. Graham did not answer right away. He looked at his hands for a long time before he finally spoke, telling her that he was trying to protect them, both of them, though he would not say from what. The answer did nothing to calm her. If anything, it deepened the unease that had been building in her chest since she first noticed the empty shelf, because a man protecting his marriage did not usually begin by erasing every trace of it. It was while she was searching his desktop for any remaining trace of their life together that she found a folder tucked into an older directory, one that had somehow survived whatever purge Graham had run through the rest of the system. The folder was labeled simply, "Before Nia." Her hand hovered over the trackpad, ready to open it, when Graham crossed the room faster than she had ever seen him move and shut the laptop before she could see what was inside. For the first time in 6 years of marriage, Nia saw real fear in her husband's eyes. Not irritation, not the practiced calm he wore like a second skin, but genuine fear. She asked him what was in that folder, and he refused to answer. Instead, he told her something that made no sense at the time, something that would replay in her mind for the rest of that night. He told her that if she received anything from a stranger before morning, she should not open it. Nia laughed at first, thinking it was a strange kind of joke, but Graham's face did not change, and the silence that followed his warning was heavier than anything she had felt in their marriage before. She left the study without another word, her mind already working through possibilities, none of which she liked. In the hallway, she paused in front of the mirror they had hung together the first month in the house, and for a moment she did not recognize her own reflection, as though the woman staring back had aged years within the span of a single evening. She thought about calling her sister, about calling a friend, about doing anything that might make the last hour feel less like the opening scene of a story she had not agreed to be part of. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and waited, phone in hand, because some instinct deep inside her insisted that whatever was coming would not wait for her to be ready. The house had grown unnervingly quiet by then, the kind of quiet that settles only after something has fundamentally shifted between two people who share a roof. Nia could hear Graham moving in the study, the soft click of drawers opening and closing, the particular restlessness of a man trying to undo something that could not be undone. She thought of the 6 years behind her, the the small rituals of their marriage. Coffee poured every morning in the same two mugs, the way he always reached for her hand during turbulence on flights, the quiet certainty she had once carried that she knew this man completely. That certainty was gone now, replaced by something colder, something that made her study every memory for cracks she had somehow never noticed before. At 11:42, sitting alone on the edge of their bed, Nia's phone buzzed once with a message from a number she did not recognize. There was no name attached to it, no explanation, only a single image file waiting to be opened. She remembered Graham's warning, and for a moment she considered obeying it, setting the phone face down and walking away from whatever this was. But 6 years of marriage had taught her that avoidance never solved anything, and the empty shelf in the closet was still burning in her mind. She opened the image. The photograph showed a hotel ballroom lit in gold, chandeliers hanging above a crowd dressed for something formal, something important. Graham stood near the center of the frame, younger, his hair cut differently, a version of himself from a decade before Nia had known him. But it was not Graham that stopped her breath. It was the woman beside him, wearing a deep green dress she had never owned and could not remember buying, standing only a few feet from where Graham stood, though neither of them appeared to be looking at the other. That woman was Nia herself. According to everything Nia knew about her own marriage, she and Graham had met at a mutual friend's dinner party 3 years after this photograph would have been taken. She had told that story 100 times. At their wedding, to co-workers, to her own mother. And yet here she was, in a ballroom she did not remember entering, wearing a dress she did not remember choosing, standing beside a man she supposedly would not meet for another 3 years. She zoomed in on the image with shaking fingers, searching the background for something that would explain what she was seeing, and that was when she found the woman standing behind them both. The woman was tall, dark-haired, dressed in black, and she was not looking at the party around her. She was looking directly into the camera, one hand raised, one finger extended, pointing with unmistakable precision straight at Nia. Something about the gesture made the hair on Nia's arms rise, because it did not look accidental. It looked deliberate, as though the woman had known, even then, that this photograph would one day find its way into Nia's hands and needed to make certain she noticed something. Nia checked the metadata buried in the image file, half expecting to find evidence of manipulation, some digital fingerprint proving the whole thing was fabricated. The date was authentic. The location data matched a hotel that still existed downtown. Whatever this was, it had not been faked with software. It had happened. She set the phone down on the mattress and pressed both palms against her eyes, trying to steady the sudden unsteadiness in her chest. 7 years was not a small gap to explain away. 7 years meant an entire chapter of her own life had somehow crossed paths with Graham's, without either of them ever knowing it, or without one of them admitting they had known. She thought of every story he had ever told her about meeting for the first time. The mutual friend, the dinner party, the way he claimed he had noticed her laugh before he noticed her face. Every detail of that story now felt suspect, as though it had been built carefully, like a stage set designed to hide something standing just behind the curtain. With her hands still trembling, Nia called Graham, who was 2 rooms away, but did not come when she called his name first. When he finally answered the phone and saw the image she had forwarded to him, his face lost all its color in a way she had never witnessed before, not during his father's funeral, not during the worst arguments of their marriage. She waited for him to ask the obvious question, to demand to know where she had gotten the photograph, who had sent it, what it meant. Instead, Graham asked her something else entirely, his voice barely above a whisper, and the question told her more than any answer could have. He asked whether a man named Elias Rowe was still alive. The name meant nothing to Nia, but the way Graham said it, like a word he had been avoiding for years, told her it meant everything to him. She pressed him immediately, demanding to know who Elias Rowe was, and why his existence mattered more to Graham than the fact that his wife had just seen an impossible photograph of herself. Graham was slow to answer, choosing his words with the caution of a man walking across thin ice, and what he finally offered was thin as well. He said Elias had once been a photographer, hired for high-end events, corporate galas, the kind of exclusive gatherings that never made it into any newspaper. He denied knowing the man beyond that, denied any deeper connection. But Nia had spent 6 years learning the particular stillness Graham's face took on when he was withholding something, and this was that stillness exactly. She did not confront him further that night. Instead, she went looking for answers on her own, searching for any record of the hotel in the photograph, a place called the Blackthorn, which she discovered had once hosted a series of private galas known for their guest lists of financiers and executives who preferred to keep their gatherings out of public view. Digging through archived event records she had no legal right to access, but found anyway through her work connections in media archiving, she found something that stopped her cold. Graham's name appeared on a guest list from that exact evening, and beside it, misspelled by a single letter, was her own. If she had never met Graham at the time the photograph was taken, there was no reasonable explanation for her name appearing on that list at all. Someone had registered her. Someone had known, 7 years before she and Graham would supposedly meet for the first time, that she would one day matter enough to invite. Nia sat with that thought long after midnight, turning over every question it raised. Who had registered her for that event? Who was the woman in black, pointing at her from across the ballroom? Who was Elias Rowe? And why did his survival matter so much to her husband? And why, after 6 years of an apparently happy marriage, had Graham chosen tonight to erase every photograph they had ever taken together? She kept digging, moving from the guest records into an old financial database she still had partial access to from a previous investigative project, and there she found a payment, substantial in size, made years earlier from a company that no longer existed. The company's name was Vance Meridian Group, dissolved not long after the gala at the Blackthorn, its records scattered and incomplete, as though someone had wanted it to disappear quietly and without questions. The name Vance caught in her mind like a splinter, though she could not yet say why. It would not be long before she understood exactly why that name mattered. She sat back in her chair, the glow of the screen the only light in the room, and allowed herself a long moment to simply breathe. Her job for the last 8 years had trained her to read patterns in images and archives that most people would overlook entirely, to notice the small inconsistencies that revealed a larger story underneath. She had built a career on trusting details other people dismissed as coincidence, and every instinct she had sharpened over those years was now screaming that nothing about this night was coincidental. The dissolved company, the misspelled name on the guest list, the folder Graham had slammed shut before she could see inside it, all of it pointed toward something deliberate, something constructed long before she had ever walked into that ballroom. Buried in an old email account Graham had forgotten to fully close, an account Nia found only because she recognized the recovery address linked to accounts she managed for her own work, was a message dated years before their marriage. The sender's name was Marlowe. The message contained no greeting, no signature, nothing but a single line that Nia read 3 times before she could fully absorb it. If she remembers, Graham loses everything. There was no explanation of who she referred to, but Nia already suspected the answer was herself. The clock read nearly 1 in the morning, and sleep felt impossibly far away. Nia lay awake beside Graham that night, both of them pretending to sleep, both of them failing at it. She listened to his breathing, too even, too deliberate to be genuine rest, and she wondered how many nights over the past 6 years he had lain beside her, carrying the exact same performance. At some point near dawn, she rose quietly and stood at the window, watching the street outside slowly brighten, and she made a decision that would carry her through the days ahead. She would not wait for Graham to hand her the truth in pieces he found convenient. She would find it herself, however long it took, however far it forced her to travel into a past that apparently had never truly belonged only to him. By the following afternoon, Nia had learned enough about the name Marlowe to build a partial picture, though the picture only deepened her unease rather than resolving it. Marlowe Vance had once served as Graham's closest professional associate, a role somewhere between assistant and confidant, according to old corporate records, that predated Nia's entrance into Graham's life entirely. Official documents claimed Marlowe had left the company 7 years earlier, around the same time as the gala at the Blackthorn, and after that departure there was almost nothing. No forwarding address, no new employer, no digital trail of any kind. As though a woman who had once stood close enough to Graham to shape his career had simply chosen to vanish. Nia began to wonder, quietly and with growing discomfort, whether her marriage had ever been the simple love story she believed it to be. She confronted Graham again that evening, refusing to let him retreat into silence the way he usually did when a conversation grew uncomfortable. This time, something in him broke slightly, and he admitted a piece of the truth he had been hiding. He told her that he had seen her once, before they officially met, though he insisted he had never spoken to her, never approached her, never let her know he existed. Nia asked how that was possible, how a man could see a stranger once, and then, years later, recognize her enough to build a life around her. Graham's answer only opened more questions than it closed. He explained that 7 years earlier, Nia had briefly appeared at an event connected to a financial scandal that had never become public, an event she did not remember attending because her involvement had lasted only minutes, an accidental crossing of paths at a moment she had long since forgotten. Graham claimed he never photographed her, that his memory of her from that night was fleeting and incidental. But the photograph Elias had sent told a different story, one where Graham was looking directly toward Nia across the ballroom, his attention anything but incidental. When she pointed this discrepancy out to him, Graham had no answer. He simply looked away, and in that silence, Nia felt the first true crack in the story he had been telling her. She pressed further, asking him plainly whether he had followed her after that night, whether the version of their meeting she had told at every dinner party and family gathering for 6 years had been nothing more than a carefully rehearsed fiction. Graham's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might finally give her something whole, something without gaps. Instead, he told her only that timing had never worked the way she believed, that some things had been set in motion long before either of them had a say in the matter. It was not an answer. It was a door left slightly open, just enough to make her certain there was an entire room behind it she had not yet been allowed to see. A second message arrived from Elias the next morning, brief and unsigned like the first. It read that Graham was telling her the truth, but only half of it. Nia stared at those words for a long time, understanding now that whatever secret her husband was protecting was too large to be contained in a single confession, that the truth would have to be extracted piece by piece, from people who had watched the story unfold from the outside while she had lived inside it, blind. Elias finally agreed to meet her in person 3 days later, choosing a quiet coffee shop on the edge of the city, where the afternoon light fell soft through tall windows, and the noise of traffic outside felt distant and unimportant. He arrived carrying a worn cardboard box, setting it on the table between them with the careful reverence of a man handling something fragile. He told her he had kept these photographs for 7 years because he had always known a day would come when she would need to see them, though he had hoped, quietly, that day might never arrive. Inside the box were dozens of photographs, printed on heavy paper that had begun to yellow slightly at the edges. Nia appeared in many of them, at galas, at private dinners, at gatherings she had no memory of attending, her face captured in moments she could not place anywhere in her own history. Elias explained gently that she had once, without realizing it, witnessed an exchange of documents inside the Blackthorn Hotel, a transaction she had not understood at the time and likely never registered as significant. But his camera had been running throughout the evening, capturing every corner of the room, including the one where Graham stood beside Marlowe, exchanging something that would prove far more dangerous than either of them anticipated. The larger truth, Elias told her, was more complicated than a simple affair or betrayal. Graham had not orchestrated whatever scheme had unfolded that night. He had tried to stop it. But in trying, he had been trapped by people with far more power than he possessed, forced into a silence that would follow him for years. Marlowe, Elias explained, had stood at the center of a financial network built on deception, one that used unsuspecting outsiders as cover, and Nia, without ever understanding it, had become its final and most dangerous witness. Graham's deletion of every photograph in their home had never been about erasing his wife from his life. It had been about erasing any digital trace that could lead someone back to her, back to the accidental witness who did not yet know what she carried inside her own memory. Before Nia left the coffee shop, Elias handed her one last photograph, holding it back until she had already gathered her coat, as though he needed a final moment to decide whether she was ready. In the image, Graham stood near the edge of the ballroom, holding a plain white envelope, his expression tight, with something between fear and resolve. Printed across the back of the envelope in dark ink were 3 words that would stay with Nia for the rest of that day. Caldwell, do not open. Elias watched her study the photograph for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice softer now, as though the years of carrying this secret had finally caught up with him. He told her that Graham had come to him once, only once, in the months after that night, asking whether the photographs still existed and whether they could ever be destroyed completely. Elias had refused, not out of malice toward Graham, but because some part of him had always believed that Nia deserved to know her own history eventually, even if that knowledge arrived years later than it should have. He said he was sorry for the years of silence, but not sorry for keeping the evidence itself, because a truth buried was still a truth waiting for its moment. Nia returned home, carrying more questions than answers, but she found Graham waiting for her at the kitchen table, and for the first time since the photographs had vanished, he did not retreat into silence when she sat down across from him. He told her everything, or nearly everything, beginning with the discovery he had made 7 years earlier, a plan designed to place blame for a massive financial fraud onto an innocent party who had no idea what was coming. Nia had wandered into the periphery of that plan entirely by accident, a stranger at the wrong event on the wrong night, and Graham had recognized almost immediately that she could become a witness capable of unraveling the entire scheme. He told her that he had tried to protect her from a distance, watching without approaching, believing that distance was the safest thing he could offer a woman who did not even know she was in danger. But Marlowe discovered his quiet vigilance, and once she did, Graham was given an impossible choice, one he had never spoken aloud to anyone until this moment. He could hand Nia over to the people orchestrating the fraud, allowing them to silence her however they saw fit, or he could ensure she disappeared from the narrative entirely, scrubbed from any record that might connect her to that night. He chose the second option, though it meant staying away from her for years, watching from a distance he never explained to anyone, not even his own sister. Years later, when circumstances finally brought them together at a mutual friend's dinner party, Graham told her he had not orchestrated the meeting, though he understood the strange cruelty of fate placing them in the same room again. What began as guilt and distant protection slowly became something real, something he had never expected to feel for the woman he had once only observed from across a crowded ballroom. He loved her, truly, but he had never found the courage to tell her the story that had brought them together in the first place, fearing it would destroy everything they had built since. Nia sat with his confession for a long moment before she finally spoke, her voice quieter than she expected it to be. She told him her pain was not rooted in the fact that he had once kept a secret from her. It was rooted in the realization that their entire marriage had been built on top of that secret, a foundation she had trusted completely without ever knowing what lay beneath it. She asked him when he had first fallen in love with her, and Graham answered without hesitation, telling her it had happened before she ever knew his name. Nia wept, not from anger alone, but from the strange grief of realizing how much of her own story had been written by other people before she ever had a chance to read it herself. She had not yet decided whether she could forgive him when Graham's phone began to ring, cutting through the fragile quiet of the kitchen. He answered without hesitation, and Nia watched his expression shift from something soft and vulnerable into something hard and alert within seconds. When the call ended, he looked at her with an urgency she had not seen in him before, and he said only 3 words, quiet enough that she almost missed them. Marlowe is back. Nia felt her pulse quicken at the name, the same name attached weeks earlier to a single cryptic warning buried in an old email account. She asked Graham what it meant, whether Marlowe posed a danger to them now, whether this was the moment everything he had spent 7 years trying to prevent was finally arriving at their door. Graham did not answer immediately. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkened street the way a man looks for something he half expects to already be waiting there. When he finally turned back to her, his expression had settled into something Nia had never seen on him before, a strange mixture of dread and, quietly, relief, as though part of him had been waiting years for this exact confrontation to arrive. Marlowe arrived at their home the following evening, and Nia was struck immediately by how little the woman resembled the villain she had imagined from the photographs and the cryptic email. She was tired, guarded, dressed simply, nothing like the confident figure pointing across a ballroom 7 years earlier. Marlowe explained, before either Nia or Graham could ask, that she had never been the architect of the scheme that had trapped them all. She had tried, in her own way, to help Graham escape the network that controlled them both, but her efforts had failed, and the true power behind everything belonged to someone far more dangerous, someone who had remained invisible throughout the entire story. Nia realized, listening to Marlowe speak, that even Elias had only ever been a piece of a much larger design, a man positioned to guide her toward the truth without ever revealing the whole of it himself. Marlowe told her that the photograph sent at 11:42 had never been meant as a threat. It had been sent to wake something inside Nia, a memory buried so deep she had never known it existed. Elias believed she had witnessed something crucial that night at the Blackthorn, some detail lost to time that could finally expose the truth if only she could recall it clearly. Nia closed her eyes and let herself drift backward into that night, searching through fragments she had never known were memories at all. She remembered gold light reflecting off polished floors, the sound of a glass shattering somewhere near the bar, the particular ticking of an antique clock mounted above the entrance. She remembered Graham, younger, tense, and Marlowe standing near him with an expression Nia now understood as fear rather than confidence. She remembered a man standing near the door, his face lost to time, but his hand clearly visible, and on that hand, a ring unlike any she had seen before or since. The detail surfaced slowly, but once it arrived, it would not leave her. She remembered watching, without understanding what she watched, as that same man handed a folder of documents to Graham, the exchange brief and tense, both men glancing around the room as though afraid of being seen. Nia could not recall the stranger's face, no matter how hard she tried, but the ring stayed vivid in her mind, an ornate band with a dark stone at its center, unmistakable and strange. When she described it to Graham, his face went pale, in a way that told her the memory mattered more than she yet understood. He said quietly that the ring belonged to his father. The revelation opened a door Graham had spent years trying to keep sealed. His family, it turned out, held deep connections to the very company at the center of the fraud that had trapped him 7 years earlier. His father had once served on the board of that organization, a fact Graham had spent years trying to distance himself from, terrified that if Nia ever learned the truth about his family's involvement, it would poison everything they had built together. His silence, he admitted, had never been about protecting a lie. It had been about protecting the fragile peace they had found despite everything working against them. Nia asked him whether his father was still alive, whether the man might still be reached, might still be forced to answer for what he had done. Graham shook his head slowly, explaining that his father had passed 3 years earlier, taking whatever full knowledge he possessed of the scheme into a grave that would never yield answers. The ring, he said, had been inherited afterward by someone else within the family circle, someone who had continued wearing it as a quiet symbol of authority within a network that had never fully disbanded. Nia felt something cold settle in her stomach at the realization that the danger surrounding them was not a relic of the past at all. It was still active, still moving, and it had been watching her long before she ever learned its name. Nia went to Celeste, Graham's older sister, demanding answers her brother seemed incapable of giving in full. Celeste resisted at first, the way she always had whenever conversations veered too close to the family's past. But eventually she relented, admitting that Graham had spent the better part of 7 years quietly gathering evidence against the very people who had once controlled his silence. He had not deleted the photographs to erase Nia from his memory. He had deleted them to sever any digital connection that might allow someone to trace her location, her history, her presence in his life, before he was ready to protect her properly. But Celeste's confession did not end there. She admitted, with visible guilt, that she was the one who had quietly passed Elias Rowe's contact information along to Nia in the first place. knowing her brother would never find the courage to reveal the full truth on his own. It was Celeste who had set this entire unraveling into motion, believing that Nia deserved the truth, even if it meant risking everything her brother had worked so hard to contain. Nia felt something shift inside her chest, a mixture of gratitude and fury she did not know how to separate. Later that night, digging through documents Elias had left with her, Nia finally located the original file connected to the fraud investigation, the paper trail that had started everything 7 years earlier. Her own name appeared within its pages, exactly as she feared it might, listed among witnesses whose testimony could unravel the entire scheme. Beside her name was a short notation that made her stomach tighten. Primary witness, unaware. She understood then, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that she had been a central figure in this story from the very beginning, long before she ever knew Graham's name, long before she understood what she had seen that night in a ballroom she barely remembered. Time became the deciding factor almost immediately. Elias warned them that the evidence he had spent years protecting would not remain secure indefinitely, that certain digital safeguards were set to expire before midnight, erasing crucial files unless they were released publicly before the deadline passed. For the first time since their marriage had begun to unravel that evening, Nia and Graham found themselves working side by side without secrets standing between them, both fully aware of what was at stake and both determined to see it through together. They spread everything across the dining table, the original photographs, the recovered emails, the bank records tracing money through companies that no longer existed, the guest list bearing both their names, and the footage Elias had quietly preserved from that night at the Blackthorn. Piece by piece, the story assembled itself into something whole, something undeniable, and Nia felt a strange calm settle over her as the fragments of 7 lost years finally found their proper place. Graham worked beside her without hesitation now, pulling files from drives he had kept hidden even from himself for years, admitting to small deceptions as they surfaced, no longer flinching from the truth the way he once had. At one point he paused, holding a printed bank statement in his hands, and told Nia quietly that he had never imagined a night would come when the two of them would sit at this table building a case together instead of building distance between them. Nia looked up at him, and for the first time since the photographs had vanished, felt something steady pass between them. Not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of something that might one day resemble trust rebuilt from its foundation. It was while reviewing the earliest photograph, the one that had started everything at 11:42 the previous night, that Nia noticed something she had missed in her exhaustion and fear. The man standing behind Graham in that image, the one she had assumed for days must be Graham's father, based on the ring alone, was not his father at all. It was someone else entirely, a man who had moved so quietly through the edges of this story that no one, not Nia, not Graham, not even Marlowe, had ever thought to suspect him. Nia recognized him the moment she looked closely enough, a figure who had appeared throughout the story as an unremarkable presence, easily overlooked, entirely unsuspicious. He was the one who had instructed Graham to erase every photograph, the one who had orchestrated the silence Graham carried for 7 long years, the one who had remained invisible precisely because no one had reason to look at him twice. And now, somehow, he knew that Nia's memory had finally returned. Her phone buzzed once on the table between them, a message from a number she did not recognize, though by now she understood exactly what that meant. 18 minutes to forget everything, the message read, and Nia felt the weight of that deadline settle over the room like a held breath. She did not run. Whatever fear moved through her in that moment, it did not translate into flight, only into a steadier kind of resolve than she had felt in days. She turned to Graham and told him they were releasing everything now, not later, not carefully staged for maximum protection, but immediately, to as many places as they could reach before the 18 minutes expired. Graham did not argue. He sat beside her at the table, and for the first time in their marriage, protecting each other did not mean hiding the truth. It meant standing fully inside it, together, without flinching. They sent the evidence to journalists, to regulatory bodies, to independent archives that Nia trusted from her years working in media preservation, scattering the truth across enough platforms that no single actor, however powerful, could hope to contain it again. Once it was sent, there was no recalling it, no quiet negotiation that could undo what had been set into motion. The clock on the kitchen wall read 11:59 when Nia's phone lit up one final time with a message from Elias, simple and quiet, after everything that had happened between them. "Now you understand why I sent the photograph," it read. Nia asked him why, though some part of her had already begun to understand the answer before he sent it. Elias replied that the photograph had been taken on the exact night Graham had first begun to love her, though neither of them had known it at the time. Though 7 years would pass before either of them understood what that night had actually meant. Nia looked up at Graham across the table, and he offered no explanation of his own, only a quiet apology for making her search for the truth alone, when she should never have had to search for it at all. She did not forgive him instantly, and she did not pretend the wound of discovering how their marriage had truly begun could be smoothed over by a single conversation, however honest. What she told him instead was simpler than forgiveness, and perhaps more important. She told him she did not need a perfect husband, only one who no longer hid from her. Graham nodded, and something in his shoulders eased for the first time in what felt like years, as though he had been carrying a weight he could finally set down. The next morning, Nia opened the wedding album again, though this time it felt different in her hands, heavier with meaning it had not carried before. The photographs were still there, restored from the media outlets and archives where they had once been shared before Graham's frantic deletion. Each image a small piece of a story she now understood far more completely than she had the day before. She did not look at them the way she once had, with simple nostalgia, but with a new kind of clarity, aware now of everything those images had once been protecting. She chose a different photograph to place on the final page of the album, not one from their wedding, not one from the years before they had known each other's names, but one taken that very morning, the two of them standing together in the kitchen, where everything had finally come undone and been rebuilt within the space of a single night. Graham asked, almost hesitantly, whether she truly wanted to keep it. Nia smiled, the first easy smile either of them had managed in days, and told him that this time there was nothing left they needed to erase. She placed the photograph carefully on the final page and wrote beneath it, in her own steady handwriting, a single sentence meant to close one story and open another, the first photo we chose to keep. Outside, the morning light moved slowly across the kitchen table where the evidence still lay scattered. No longer secrets, no longer threats, only proof of everything they had survived to reach this quiet, unremarkable moment together. This was never simply the story of a wife discovering her husband had betrayed her. It was something deeper and harder to name, a reminder that people sometimes erase the past not because they wish to forget the ones they love, but because they fear that same past will find its way back before they have the chance to protect what matters most. And yet love, real love, the kind capable of surviving a night like this one, can only exist once protection stops being built from silence and starts being built from truth.